I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Christmas on Christmas Eve on FOMO. Lucas, is it a day for a history lesson? I think that there's some stuff to unpack here, or at least there's interesting historical tidbits that we can bring together to help people understand this day. And no, this is not a picture of Jesus here. This is a picture of a different historical figure.
Who is this a picture of?
This is a picture of Nimrod.
Ah, and why Nimrod? And yes, of course, it is a day to talk about history, the history of Christmas, and so many other things. It's a, uh, sort of on the heels of a day of astrological significance, which of course we'll get into too. But why Nimrod? Who is Nimrod?
Well, Nimrod's a historical figure. He was featured in the Bible. He's the son of Ham, who's one of the sons of Noah. Ham was the one who was accursed, so he was not the favored son of Noah. So it was Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And in the lore of what happened with Nimrod, he was the mighty hunter, and his mother celebrated his death because when he died, an evergreen tree sprouted from his chest, and so it signified that Nimrod had eternal life and that he, was always present and that he hadn't truly died. And there was another part that some have claimed that there's a provision in the Bible that specifically says not to celebrate Nimrod, not to do the things that they did to celebrate his rebirth, and that it's been documented here that it says, "Don't go into the forest, don't cut a tree down, don't deck it in silver and gold." All of this here, and someone said, "Well, no, 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 that's not about a Christmas tree at all." But it just sure seems like it's talking about a Christmas tree to me. I'm not sure. Just on first blush at reading that, sure seems like there's a prohibition in Jeremiah saying not to do this. So this is the reason why Nimrod comes into play here, because it appears that in the Bible there's a provision against doing this particular set of activities.
So, wow, I've always assumed that that Christmas trees came from the Norse and was something to do with Norse mythology. Um, but you're lighting up some lights for me here. So the Christmas tree is essentially, uh, well, if we can also maybe extrapolate from that metaphor, it's like the tree that grows on the grave. That notion of eternal life, Peter, Paul, and Mary, soldiers and flowers in the field.
Well, evergreen trees have always had some significance for the fact that they, never drop their leaves and they're green all year long, and so it's always been a fascination of ancient peoples of why some trees drop their leaves and others just seem to eternally be growing and green and have life. So I think that's where the evergreen tree significant comes in to
Yeah,
the
and
narrative.
well, and the Christian tradition has this notion of those who accept Christ will live an everlasting life. So, but also just the image of the tree, that's planted on a grave. I find I hadn't made that connection with the Christmas tree. Um, I figured it had something to do with pagan Vikings dancing around a tree that was selected for the shadow that it cast with regards to the summer or for the winter solstice. But interesting about Nimrod. I also find that getting into Noah and that aspect of the Bible and his children. Another very interesting part about biblical history. The Great Flood. Um, supposedly also it landed in Turkey in Mount Ararat, um, which we find out today is near Göbekli Tepe.
Ah, well, another interesting part of the flood narrative with Noah is that there were three sons, and one of the sons was was not preferred because he did this activity which is poorly described in the Bible of uncovering his father's nakedness. It's not exactly clear really what's going on there, but this family dynamic where you have three sons and one is not favored and is rather accursed because of whatever activities he took. It's an interesting dynamic in the Bible, and it's an interesting part of these family interpersonal things that happen. But yeah, but what about Augustine of Hippo? Because this is a historical figure, a real person who lived, and he was instrumental in moving things nearer to December 25th. Is that right? That's the reason why 'tis the season, right? We can thank Augustine.
Well, in preparation for conversation about the history of Christmas, I thought, you know, we celebrate the 25th as the birth of Christ, but it was not always thus. And
Yeah, there's markers in the Bible too of like saying when certain things should be celebrated, and I think this was more of a time of the winter solstice, right? I don't think this traditionally had anything to do with the Christian religion, right?
well, and absolutely, but I think many religions have festivals in the winter because you're not chained to the growth cycle, the rains, everything going on in the summer, and trying to store it for food. So in the winter, it's cold. You got time on your hands. The nights are longer. More reason for having a festival to get you through the winter. 12th night like, and yeah. So we just had the winter solstice. It runs generally the 20th through the 22nd of December. Did you happen to catch which? It passed by, and sadly,
I
I
think I think it was the 21st. I think it's also the first day of winter is the winter solstice, right?
I mean, I usually think of winter as starting before then, but yes, yes.
Well, astronomically or whatever, the according to the way that all things are reckoned, there's a day that winter is supposed to start. I canonically think of the first day of winter is the first day you have to scrape frost off your windows on your car. If that has happened, that's the first day of winter, in my opinion.
See, I tend to agree, especially if in November you've shoveled 2 feet of snow, then you're allowed to count winter. Um, but no, I would say for many purposes, the days of solstice, the summer solstice in June, the what sometime around June 22nd maybe, and the winter solstice in December are two of the most important days of the year in antiquity. And we've human civilizations have long understood that the days grow longer at a certain point, they grow shorter at a certain point. So lining up the most holy days of the Christian religion with that is no surprise. And I'm not sure um, when Jesus's birth was celebrated. Uh, but Augustine of Hippo is a man who lived in Algeria in North Africa, 400 years after the crucifixion of Christ, and he was a monk who um, sort of led the creation of the of the church as we know it today. So I should say maybe the Catholic Church as we know it today. There were various regions of the Christian Church, of the Orthodox Church, and if we look in Russia and see the Orthodox Church there, but also in the Middle East, and we see the Armenians and a couple of these other ancient Christians. As things are going on in Syria too, there are a couple more sects of these ancient Christians. But 400 years after Christ's death, or Christ's resurrection, maybe I should say, um, there was a movement to create what we would know as the Catholic Church, and Augustine of Hippo was a leader in that movement. So I think it was then that the birth of Christ was began to be associated or pegged to December 25th.
Yeah, because I think if you look at some of the ways that you might be able to discern from what was happening at the time of the narrative with the Magi, and I know you wanted to get into the Magi, so this is a great segue into it, because if you listen to the biblical account of when Mary was first pregnant with the Immaculate Conception and everything that was happening around then, certain types of things with the shepherds tending their flocks and whatever couldn't have really happened at the time when they suspected. So it's more like fall, I think, or maybe September might be the appropriate time for Christ's birth. But what was going on with the Magi? Why does that catch your attention in the whole story of Christmas?
Well, um, from the time I was a child, I was always gladdened to know that not only did we have commercial Christmas that starts after Thanksgiving, and is the time of of Christmas advertisements and sales, etc., but that the real season of Christmas was the 2 weeks, the 12, the fortnight, the 12 days of Christmas that follow the first day of Christmas, which is the 25th. And of course we know the song, which I won't sing it to you, but I would, of the 12 days of Christmas, my true love gave to me. And that is about that is a song that was created for Christians under persecution, so they might know or have a mnemonic for important aspects of the church. But it also mirrors the journey, the mythical journey of the Magi, and how long it took them following the birth of Jesus to find Bethlehem and to come and present their gifts. So, and I'm also just fascinated with the stories about who these people were, and that there are many, how do I put this, there are many, there are now you put me on the spot here. I don't want to say fictional, but there's many allegorical. So there's many allegorical aspects about who the Magi were. That they were from Persia and India and Africa, or Egypt, and that there was an old king, a middle-aged king, and a young king. And there are also other narratives that exist outside of the Bible as to um, the the experiences Jesus had. In the Bible, we know Jesus as a baby, Jesus as a 12-year-old, and then Jesus as a 33-year-old. Um, but there are other traditions and other books that talk about the interplay between Christianity and other ancient religions that existed in
Well,
the near Far
the
East.
first thing that struck me about this story was, Jesus is referred to as the King of Kings, and so here you have at the birth of Christ, you have these three kings or these three wise men coming to pay homage or to worship the King of Kings. I thought that that's kind of an interesting thing that first happens in this narrative, and that's what stuck out to me in this entire story is that you've got these three kings, and the first thing they do is come pay homage. So this is bringing gifts to the born king.
Well, and I mean, not only that, but one of them, representing Persian, Zoroastrianism, one from India, um, representing Buddhism, um, the other from Egypt, maybe representing the ancient Egypt religion. It's interesting how there is woven into this narrative that Christianity is. As these other kings from these other religions and areas come to pay homage to Christ, that this is going to be the religion that is better, greater, um, uh, than these old and ancient religions. So,
Yeah, you bring up Zoroastrianism, and then another one that comes to mind is Mithraism. That was the Roman religion.
I'm not familiar with Mithraism. Why do they? What was Mithraism about?
Let me get that pulled up. Just one second.
Well, and the other thing that I find interesting is a lot of this, a lot of I don't know, this canonized uh, Catholic, and when I say Catholic, I mean as opposed to Orthodox narrative about Christ is being set again by Saint Augustine of Hippo. And go ahead with Mithraism, and I'm gonna wax about Egyptian versus Syrian monasticism.
Well, so Mithraism was a religion at the time when Christianity was just first coming into play, and a lot of what's in Christianity right now are shadows of what was in Mithraism, because as they were converting the Roman Empire and Christianity was starting to take on, a lot of what occurred was there were things that people had already been doing, and so they got recast into a different light. There were activities that were going on, and they said, "Well, you can keep doing what you've been doing because you've really been worshiping Christ all along. Because this activity that you've been engaging in, well, that really has something to do with Christianity and Christ." And so there was this great recasting of different types of things as they would go out and convert. And so it's a lot easier to convert somebody to do something if you say, "Well, you don't have to change anything you're doing. You're just now you're worshiping Christ instead of whatever it is that you were doing before." And so there were a lot of activities that were happening in Zoroastrianism and in Mithras that would then become activities in the Christian religion, and you see a lot of this kind of stuff that Easter is a recasting of the worship of ancient gods, and there's a lot of things that have actually been changed to try and recast into this mold, but like you don't see a lot of these things if you just read through the Bible, that they're not mentioned. And so it was really during these periods where these other religions were being absorbed by Christianity and their activities. And so Mithraism is one of them, and it was very popular in the Roman Empire at that time.
Well, the Romans also they looked back to the Greeks for for a lot of inspiration, a lot of their a lot of the story they tell about the success of the Roman Empire, and the it being a carryover of the apex of civilization. And that early Christian church was very Greek. The uh, it was the New Testaments were written in Greek, Old Testament in Hebrew. Um, I don't know. Interesting about Mithraism. I was looking at and reading that about the handshakes and the seven levels, and I was thinking, is this the ancient Illuminati? Is this where we get these notions of the Illuminati, like a carryover of the hardcore Mithraists?
Well,
That
some have speculated that a lot of those ancient societies are carryovers from these really ancient religions, and that they never stopped being worshipped. And so this really is the old gods persisting forward. Aren't you? Have you ever read American Gods by Neil Gaiman? Is that one familiar to you?
No, never read that. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
It's a cool book. Neil Gaiman's a great author, and this one he says all the gods that have ever existed, they actually have some representation in the world. They can take on physical form, they can do things on the planet, but they can only do that if people are still worshiping them and thinking about them. And that's why a lot of that old stuff doesn't occur anymore, because people are no longer worshiping that. And then there's the new gods of what people spend all their time and attention worshiping, like the internet and telecommunications. And so it's a grand clash between the old world and the new world, with the gods fighting each other. And he does a really good job of bringing a lot of the old traditions, religions, and whatever into how they could have been manifest in the new world in America. And it's a really cool book, and they he brings some of these ideas forward. Is that you there are people who have been worshiping these old gods for a long time, and they never really stopped. They just fell out of favor. They weren't as popular anymore. So yeah, it's a good take on maybe what's going on with this whole Illuminati secret society stuff.
Well, as we also sort of pause in Rome, it puts me in mind of Moneta and the birth of money. You know, the um, the coin press at the Temple of Moneta in Rome, and where we get the word money. And we've talked about the anonymity that rides in coins. And I know there were older coins also, but this is I don't think that we can ignore the impact of Roman money, and how that money, passed beyond the borders of control of Rome, um, and began to be picked up, especially in Europe, um, and spread throughout the world. Um, the money in Rome. So I think about that also. It's going also back to 400 AD, the Christian Church. There were huge changes that were made too in the understanding of debt, the windows of debt, the windows of loans. We hear a lot about the difference between interest rates uh, between Jews and Christians, but we don't also talk about the 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 windows of loans and when they were to be repaid. Christians had a lower interest rate, but they also loaned they gave loans for a month, and you were supposed to pay that loan back in a month, and that wasn't necessarily true of of Jews. They had their jubilee. They had, of course, there's also many different tribes of the Jewish religion, and they had their own rules. But anyway, as we talk about as we go back there, I was thinking about Monet. Monet. You bring up Boxing Day. Before we go to Boxing Day, though, I wanted to go ahead. Go ahead. I see
No,
you.
no, go ahead. No.
Well, going back also to the origins of the Catholic Church and coming from North Africa, there's something else that goes on between that understanding of the events that occurred in in Palestine, in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem. Um, there were different notions of, say, shall we say, social order or monasticism, that were much older, and these would carry over into the monasticism of medieval Europe. And North Africa was a much more arid, a drier, a harder climate, and and as opposed to Syria, I should say, or the the lands between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the lands of what we now call the Middle East or maybe Syria. Um, and in Syria, there was this notion that um, if um, if you didn't want to participate in the um, in I don't know, the business, the commerce of the area, in bringing in the crops from the fields and working the land with the other people, then you could go out to the wilderness and think of our stories of, say, John the Baptist or other prophets of the time.
Yeah,
And
he was wandering around eating locusts and wild honey.
yeah, and those people who also, to take the words from Tennessee Williams, were living on the kindness of others, who went out to the wilderness and had expectations of God, but also their fellow mankind. Those were angels. And there's a great story of a man who had fields, and his brother decided that he was going to become an angel, and he went out to the wilderness, and he got hungry and came back, and knocks on his brother's doors to ask for food. And his brother said, "Well, I don't know you. You look like an angel to me." And that was an acceptable, unacceptable, um, social role to take on in Syria, and that also grew into convents or monasteries of people who would leave society and not participate in the work, and relied on the kindness of others.
Did those
Um,
two have the same root meaning? Monet, that Monet and monastic. Is that the same, or is that slightly different there? Do you know?
I have we should look up the etymology of monasticism, whatever the root is. I have an idea. It probably comes from the notion of setting oneself apart. Um, something to do like hermetic or something of the like. But I'm not sure. I would guess that it's maybe Latin for hermetic, but that's guess. But so in Syria, they're
Yeah,
not
it's a
only.
different root here. It has a meaning of alone, monos.
There we
Whatever that
go.
comes out there.
So her yeah, setting oneself apart to go be alone, a lone wolf. So in Syria, this it became vogue, a flex for landowners who are rich landowners, people with excess, to sponsor a house full of angels, a house full of people who are living on the kindness of others. And we can see that, like fast forward to medieval Europe, and um, that was it was a common practice in medieval Europe for the lords of the Aquitaine to sponsor and to send money to abbeys and monasteries of people that would get together and pray for them, pray for their, to pray constantly for their souls, for et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah,
and that goes
that
back.
that idea of sponsoring people and patronage, that was a big thing to do with wealth, was to sponsor people to be able to live these lives.
Yes, but in North Africa, where in Algeria, Tunisia, what that's today, Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, especially Egypt, and this goes back to, if you've ever heard the term Coptic Christians. Um, Coptic Christians were those that were living in North Africa, but that was a much there was not the land was not as fat in North Africa, and so there was no um, that system of monasticism did not occur in North Africa, and instead there were um, communal monasteries, people who came together to work the land together. But if you didn't work, then you weren't part of the monastery or part of the commune. And in some ways, like our world of crypto today, sometimes I think about this argument between proof of stake and proof of work. Goes all the way back to ideas of monasticism in in to the time of Christ and beforehand.
Okay, wait a minute. So Christ is like proof of work, or what? I'm not following this one, but I love it. Go on.
I mean, I would say Christ is proof of stake.
Proof of
Chri-
stake.
Christ is the Vitalik of his time.
Oh my
Uh,
God, you're gonna like the Maxis are gonna come like with pitchforks now.
oh, now we're gonna have an ETH following after those phrases. But I mean, think about it. The proof of work. Those people who are engaging in a system must be in blockchains. It's providing the consensus security, but on a farm or a kibbutz or whatever, this is
Oh man,
people like.
it's so straying into the territory of blasphemy here. It's like it's not of him that willeth or of him that runneth. It's not of him that does the work, but of him that staketh his coins.
Uh, okay, there. That was beautifully put. So anyway, but you also brought up Boxing Day earlier, and I don't want to dwell too much on that or dig it, but it's interesting to think that these notions of stake and proof Yeah, they didn't start with the Paris Commune. They didn't start with Karl Marx. They didn't start with Jesus. They go much, much deeper into notions of how we get along together. But we also, not only do we have a tree on Christmas, we give presents. This notion of giving presents in some ways harkens back to, again, these ancient Christian stories, the frankincense, gold, and myrrh that were brought by the three wise men, the contributions of these other parts of the world, and these other older religions. But we also put them in boxes and we unwrap presents. And um, I'm I don't know. Well, I should say it's an assumption that I make that that this is related, but Boxing Day um, comes to us again from feudal systems that occurred in medieval Europe. So, you're familiar with Boxing Day? I know they have Boxing Day in Canada, and they have Boxing Day in England or the UK. Have you heard of Boxing Day before?
Well, I believe we've talked about it on the show before, so it's definitely something that I have familiarity with, and I've run across it, but it's definitely not as much of a part of any culture that I grew up in. So, to the extent that I know about it, it's at a distance or an arm's length. But yeah, enlighten us.
Okay, so um, and again, like piggybacking off of these notions of proof of or Coptic monasticism versus Syrian monasticism. Coptic monasticism in some way also leads to this notion of serfdom that exists in feudalism, that people are bound to the land, that you have a landowner and people work for that lord. And also, like, as Christianity changes these notions of debt forgiveness, there are people who become indebted and become bound to work that they cannot pay off for a feudal lord. And there came the question to the Catholic and the Orthodox churches both, as to um, is it right, is it Christian to hold somebody into slavery, into owning slaves? And the answer was, well, they're bound to the land or they're bound to the house, depending on you know which which I don't know, doxology of religion is making the argument. But they said, well, as long as these medieval serfs can pick up and move one day a year, then they actually have some liberty. Their lives are the there's still some aspect of God in their lives. And so, you know, the and especially the Orthodox Church in what, Russia and Turkey, um, came up with this concept of people could be bound to the land as serfs, but they had to be able to pick up and move one day of the year. And so, if you didn't like your landlord, or your lord, I should say, you had one day of the year. So box up everything, and move on down the road, find another lord, and go work for him.
But I mean, but their freedom was limited to you could be enslaved by one guy or enslaved by another.
Yes, but you could choose.
Yes, you had the freedom to choose your slavery.
So you could pick J.P. Morgan or Chase Bank.
Or
Um,
BlackRock. There we go.
or Black, you could pick BlackRock or Grayscale. So I don't has much changed? I don't know how much has changed. Um, but I think that's just fascinating to that there were generations of people who lived, bound to a lord, but um, who who knew that if the Lord mistreated them, that they could box up all of their possessions one day of the year and ostensibly move to the next town over, or wherever that may be, and start over. So, and that brings us Boxing Day today and presents at Christmas.
So we've got the Christmas tree sprouting from Nimrod. We've got Boxing Day with the celebration of your ability as a feudal serf to pick a different lord. This is some heady stuff. Unpacking the origins of Christmas here, and we've got Saint Augustine of Hippo moving the day from fall to the winter solstice.
And the three wise men. Let's not forget the three wise men.
I almost feel like we didn't get far enough with the three wise men. Although I'm not sure what else I have to add, but it just seems like there's a lot there on that, because they're bringing gifts. We've got Boxing Day where you're packing up and moving around. This is this whole origin of gift giving, but where does Santa Claus come into this? Because I've heard some things, and I don't know if you've got any take on that. But how do we get this holly jolly guy with a red suit on? It's my understanding that that red suit is actually a shamanic garb where the flayed outside skin is turned around, and that's why it's red, because it's the inside of the hide still showing.
Wow, that just got pretty visceral. I wasn't prepared for that. Spilled my coffee.
Well, I'll see.
Um,
That's it. We gotta get into the true meaning of Christmas here. Like, let me see if I can find a reference to that.
well, there's definitely uh, could be part of it. I know Santa comes something from Saint Nicholas, um, but I don't know. Rusty, you might know more about Santa and Saint Nick. I know there's Krampus is also sort of thrown into that too. Um, but I don't know that much about Santa, and whatever I learned um, from Santa Claus with what's his name from Tool Time.
Well, here's something. I don't know how good this reference is, but like there's definitely been stuff said in this respect. It's like saying, well, what was really going on with this guy, Santa. He's around the area where people traditionally take uh, these types of mystical thought journeys through ingestion of different types of stuff. He's jolly, he's red nose, he's all this kind of stuff has to do with you know, the shamanic traditions of those who live in the North countries. And they had some pretty wild stuff. Like all that Norse mythology is likely coming into play here with the reindeer.
You're in Minnesota. Have you ever heard of the Native American tradition or story of red ears or red antlers?
No, what's with the red ears?
Ah, well, again, I'd have to refresh. But so there's a character in the I don't know the Algonquian tribal histories, um, which is a man with red antlers, and he's called Red Ears in some places, Red Antlers in others. But I also think Pecos, Texas has a massive panel of rock art that is also centers around uh, deers, deer, and and there some of the people of in the Sierra Madre or Sierra Nevada, and I'm not sure what in northern Mexico, made a great pilgrimage on in which they would ingest uh, psychedelic substances, I believe San Pedro cactus. But again, I'd have to check into the details. And they would go on a psychedelic journey out into to the Permian Basin. You might see if you can find red ears. The story of red ears and all of that. But you can also look. You can also maybe pull up the Pecos, Texas painted rock. The painted rock panel out in Pecos, Texas, because it's interesting to see the similarities between and as you were talking about Santa Claus and Amanita muscaria, which Amanita muscaria also exists in the Rockies, right around Rusty and the San Juans. You can find Amanita muscaria if you go out in the woods and look hard enough. But there were, I guess what I'm saying is it wasn't just an old world phenomenon, if that's what was occurring there, for shamanistic journeys that were tied to antlered creatures.
I think there's a lot to that origin story of like what is Santa really hearkening to, and I think it's another one of these where we had the Christian church casting things in a different light. You had these traditions that were happening, and this one being like this Norse shamanic tradition, and saying, well, this has to do with Christianity, and there's Saint Nicholas and some other stories. So it's this long tradition within the Christian religion to absorb and take on other things and make something new out of it, but to allow people to continue doing whatever it was that they were doing, but make a new light or a new understanding of what had been happening. So I'm pretty confident that that's what's going on with Santa. That harkens back to this shamanism stuff of what was happening with the Norse people.
Yes, well, I do think, yes, I certainly agree. I'm very interested in these our relationships with I don't know, the ties between shamanism and the rise of our ancient I don't know, fascination with the astrology and the earth. There's something there. But yeah, there's red horn. I said red ears. I guess it's red horn. And but that's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. To we have we know about Corn Mother and other things, but it's a good one. So um
So I know one last thing that you referenced here was the North American Myths and Legends book. That this one documents some of the stuff we're talking about here with the Algonquins. I think we're almost at the top of the hour too. So maybe this final thoughts, if this is something important, or we're just putting it in here for reference.
oh, it's in yes, I definitely recommend to take a dive down Red Horn and the importance of Red Horn in and I'm searching for a word here, but yeah, Algonquian, the Algonquian people, Algonquian language speakers. Um, Red Horn is fascinating. I I like yeah, yeah. I in our conversation about Christianity, it's interesting that we wound up here, but it's fascinating to think that there are similarities between some of these ancient interpretations, ancient legends. And I had never thought about Red Horn and Santa Claus, but if Santa Claus came from an association between shamanism and reindeers, then there's definitely something there.
All right. Well, we'll be back not tomorrow, but day after Christmas. So we'll probably run a old episode tomorrow in case you need to have your FOMO fixed. But we'll be back again soon. Lucas, great discussion today, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Merry Christmas. See you on the 26th.